Morning, we have Zach Kromkowski.
Kowski. Yep.
Kromkowski?
Yep.
Ha, cool. I like being able to pronounce people's names correctly. It's going to do strategic endpoints with hardening, or strategic endpoint hardening with CIS. He's a local boy, well, semi-local. He lives in Illinois with his wife and 2 dogs.
Not me.
Nope. What did they do?
They might have printed it wrong.
Or he gave me the wrong list.
I got 2 cats living in California. In a van down by the river.
Right, this is exactly not the right list at all. That's funny.
Can I go to his talk?
Well, it's funny because it says the things in here, but I think they just kind of gave me everybody's and didn't
I can knock out my own intro.
All right, well, I'm gonna take these so I can figure out who's next. That way, I don't do that again.
Benefits of going first, right?
Right.
All right, guys. I'm Zach Kromkowski. Nice to meet you guys. So I am the co-founder to Senteon Managed Endpoint Hardening. Effectively today, I'm going to talk about all the things I've learned about Windows internals over the last 4 years, and it's super invigorating, tons of setting talk, and if that is what gets you excited at 9 a.m., you are in the right spot. So effectively, I'm going to kick off and just want to get a baseline understanding of everyone's experience in the room, right? So can I get a clicker, actually?
It's over there. It's right there, sorry.
Cool, no worries. So, very first, like I said, strategic hardening with CIS. So, first question, guys. Are you familiar with the CIS controls? You're going to need hands up, and I know half the people in the room, so you really have to engage. All right, so about half of the room. Cool. So, CIS, just as a quick overview, is Center for Internet Security. It's effectively a prioritized list of recommendations of how to secure your enterprise before boom. So left of boom recommendations to keep the business very defensible and in turn makes it very compliant by taking these recommendations. So that's the top 18, but there is more to CIS, namely the CIS benchmarks. So this is a little bit deeper and not a ton of people maybe know this one, but those of you who already knew CIS, who also knows the CIS benchmarks? About half of the half, right? So CIS benchmarks get a lot more granular. So when I talk about the controls, control 1 is like know your hardware asset inventory, control 2, priority 2 rather, know your software asset inventory, and so forth, right? You can't secure your environment if you don't know what's there. So the CIS benchmarks take those high-level prioritized list recommendations and makes very, very granular recommendations on how to secure things. So it'll actually explicitly tell you, do this to that, right? And the big scope of this presentation, I'll talk about hardening as a whole, but I am going to be very focused on hardening Windows, workstations, servers, hardening browser applications, right? But I will bring up system hardening as a whole throughout, but just know a lot of this research I'll present today is going to be heavy on the Windows side. Cool. So CIS benchmarks, to kind of summarize that, there is recommendations by CIS that is all kind of a community global effort of their nonprofit to say, hey, for something like machine and activity timeout, the best recommendation or most usable and secure recommendation is 15 minutes, right, 900 seconds. Oh, it goes to things way more technical like networking protocols. I didn't know I put that. Networking protocols like disabling SMB1, right? Making sure you disable NTLMD1, right? So it is taking very technical recommendations. Unfortunately, Windows does have a ton of settings. So there are a lot of recommendations. So is anyone willing to guess how many pages of documentation CIS provides just to harden a Windows 11 box? At least 7 is good. That is not wrong. 20? 7 reams? Is a ream about 200 pages? Because that would be the closest. So CIS benchmarks, like I said, a ton of settings in Windows. CIS provides the recommendation, the rationale, the potential impact, pathway, machine key, everything you need. So this documentation, just for a Windows 11 box, does add up to about 1,300 pages, and my animation is out of order. So 1,379 pages, and I assume if I click it, oh, interesting. I updated my deck this morning. This is downloaded. I understand now. Okay, so it's about 1,300 pages. And a funny story of something since Senteon has gone to market and started to work with a lot of our partners. One of our partners said, as an interview question, he asked if they were willing to read this document before getting the job. That was an interview question. Are you willing to read a 1,000-page PDF to secure this computer? The gentleman did get the job, but fortunately we made it so he never actually had to read it. But talking about changing settings, a lot of us in here may be familiar with GPO, the policy objects, PowerShell, Intune, right? A lot of these Windows mediums to make changes. When I bring up PowerShell, who here considers PowerShell to be an absolute security tool? This is a security tool, it's a security function, and that is what it is. It's a hard question, and that one, I know. It's kind of a trick, right? Because all of us, especially the engineers in the room, do we have engineers in the room? Admins? Yeah? So very familiar with PowerShell. Chris, I think you too, no? A little bit. So, is it a PowerShell tool? This is kind of the root of the first thing we wanted to understand when we were considering, should we build what Senteon does? Should we build automation to change settings? Or can you do this today with existing mediums within Microsoft? Something I learned very quickly talking to engineers, admins, and everyone who is truly responsible for these settings is there's many scenarios where you deploy the script and then the endpoint doesn't actually take it, right? You change the Intune policy, and then it doesn't actually change on the local policy level of the machine you're targeting, right? And maybe it does change, but then the next week you get the same ticket, and it magically changed right back. Microsoft never told me. I didn't write a script to put it back, right? It just magically changed. So that's kind of the big thing I want to talk about to really set the stage for today's conversation, right? So I asked you kind of, is PowerShell a security tool? It surely has security functions. You can use it to do incredible things. Extremely powerful, right? That is the medium Windows gave you. But what are the features of just a, generic security tool? Like, if it's considered a security tool, it must have one or so of these features. I'll kind of give an example to start. Most security tools that I utilize or consider security tools have at least a role-based access privileges, right? Some RBAC settings, right? So that's one piece that I would say PowerShell doesn't really have, right? You have admin PowerShell, you have normal, but it doesn't really have that access control. Any other features of other security tools you guys can think of? Like, what features would you consider to be required to be a security tool? Anyone have any other ideas? Logging, yep. Audit trail with that, right? You don't really have that with PowerShell with the event log viewer, but who wants to dig through that? Any other thoughts on that? Reporting? Kind of generate reports with PowerShell. Pretty complicated, but nothing comprehensive. Some ideas I have, and you got it right there. The first one I thought of when I was thinking about this question was actually auditing. I mean, when you perform a security action, especially if you're in a regulated space, you're going to need to prove the action you took, when you took it, make sure it stayed took, right? So that was the first thing that came up to me. I mentioned RBAC, but policy management and enforcement is another one, right? If we're using PowerShell to do hardening, I'm specifically talking about hardening here, you can create that first script to harden it, to change the setting. How are you making sure it stays changed, an hour from now, right? You can't just reoccurringly run that script 24/7. You don't have the resources for that, especially when I'm talking about 1,300 pages of documentation just for one system. Encryption, data handling, support, and maintenance. Anyone ever call Windows support for help with a PowerShell script? You don't want to wait on a 90-minute, 120-minute phone call for them to transfer you to someone else? That's the one. I miss the paperclip personally. If he could just get some AI in there and tell me how to write my scripts, maybe we all would be able to do it. But this is my point here, right? All of my market research that I did over the years was the best way to do hardening is via PowerShell. And honestly, I agree. Like, that is the way you do this today. We talked about Intune. I'll go into Intune a little bit more, but PowerShell is definitely what I have found to be the most effective effort of doing this. And even that was still a little complicated for most, not a little, very. And I'll talk about that more as well. So let's dive a little bit further here. functional does not mean secure. Does anyone understand what I mean by that, or does anyone vehemently disagree with that statement? Anyone want to explain what I mean by this one? Just because it works doesn't mean it's safe. Windows especially is built for the Fortune 100 companies and our grandmas, right out of the box. So functional, they want it to be so easy your grandma can open it up and log into her email or Facebook, whatever, but they also want you to do your accounting, do your banking, handle Fortune 100 data, right? So functional does not mean secure. Just because it works doesn't mean it's working in the most secure way. And I will try to lighten this up, right? Default security settings. Who here considers a default setting a misconfiguration? I like the people in the back. So this is a very interesting point here because with those 1,379 pages of documentation, this does add up to about 470 settings. Of these 470 settings that CIS recommends, anyone have a guess on how many are by default in the secure state deemed by CIS? 70 is spot on. So 15%, or about 70 settings, is all that is configured correctly or securely by default. Everything, most everything else is set to not configured. I will note, just because it's set to not configured, doesn't mean it doesn't have a behavior associated with it, but that not configured is able to be taken advantage a little bit easier, and it will not pass any of your compliance audits or really help you standardize your environment. And the word standardization is another one that's really key to hone in on. So again, Senteon really focuses on this, and when I actually talk to partners, prospects, friends, I kick off with hardening. That's how I start, but it quickly transitions to the term standardization, right? How much more effective would all of our enterprises be if we knew that every computer, every server, every application was configured the same way? That when a ticket came inbound, it was because it was a genuine ticket that was unique and needed to be addressed, right? Because if everything's configured the same way, it's going to be pretty unique that if someone actually has an issue that isn't already addressed, right? So standardization is a big thing that I've really been talking about in all these that I've been doing. Oh, and the second one I came up with here. Us before today, right? We're loving defaults, right? My goal here is to make sure no one wants default settings at the end of this presentation, but we'll see if I pull that off. All right. So I'm going to share a story. I do like visuals, not a huge fan of heavy text slides, even though I do have one in here. When any of us join a new enterprise, or maybe you're an entrepreneur and you start your own enterprise, or when you buy a computer from Best Buy or wherever you buy that, when you first get that Windows computer, it's going to be 100% default, and that default box is probably going to look something like a rundown house. Yes, I'm doing a house metaphor here. I know it's been used a bunch, but it is honestly my favorite one for the concept of hardening. So by default, that Windows box, that house, you can sleep in there. You might have a little bit of a chill. It rains, you probably get a little wet, but it works. You have a roof, sort of. And better than that, if you do go into a new enterprise that already has all the computers, not only is it not default, there's probably some applications and various things on that system that aren't necessary. And there might be a back door or an actual hole that's even worse than the default settings because you just got to that enterprise. You don't know what they're doing yet. So, of course, you were hired as an admin or an engineer, right? The first thing you're going to do is put up some new wood, right? You're going to build that house, right? Well, my experience, you install an EDR. That's what I see in my research. You just toss an AV, right, or an EDR, right? CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, right? You get an EDR. Now your house is good. Okay. We have some time again, right? Now we're gonna go back. We have free time. We're gonna go back and fix the house. No, unfortunately, you get a scanning tool, so you know which parts of the house are broken, right? Because it's not visually obvious. You want to scan first before you do any of the work. CIS already tells you what's broken without performing a scan, right? They already told you all the settings to look at. So that scanning tool, yes, has value. I'm not downplaying the value of a scanning tool here. But out of the gate, when you've never done hardening, that list of what to do already exists. You didn't necessarily need to do a scan second, right? Maybe you do it after you actually fix the house. Anyway, now that you know what's broken, you're going to go ahead and go back and fix that house. I will say yes. The next step I found in my research is you go back and you fix the things on that house that you deem critical. How do you deem out of 500 settings which ones are critical and which ones aren't? It's a gut opinion from what I've seen in my research. SMB1, I talk about that, right? That is one that I see configured correctly 70% of the time. Yes, not 100%. Absolutely not 100%. But everyone knows what it is. And that is one that people will typically try to go back. Maybe they'll do machine activity timeout, right? You know, these are just some of those settings that people do go back, but at the end of the day, you can only write so much PowerShell. You can only use so much Intune. You only have so much time to figure out how Intune works. So now you don't get to fix the whole house because now there's a new project, right? Well, now you started that new project, you have free time again, so you're going to go back and finish that project, right? No. You're going to install a fence, another layer of security, which again, I'm not downplaying the other layers. I'm just pointing out something new always comes up, and in my years of doing this, I'm finding that that piece that keeps on get started, stops again, get started, stops again, is actually configuring assets. Asset configuration, that's literally what we're talking about here. So whitelisting, blacklisting, whatever you want to consider that fence layer to be. If you're really lucky, you actually configure that correctly as well, so that's cool. But at the end of the day, guys, where are our employees working? Where are you working, right? It may not even be on the machine you think it is, right? It may not even be in the building you think they are. It's remote, right? And at least if they're not in that building or using that computer, they're probably using, a VPN, probably. Or not, right? So really the question is, do you know where your data is, right? Do you know which applications, which hardware assets are actually worth the time to prioritize? That's the first thing. Because if you don't know where your data is or the most critical pieces, there's not really a point to doing any of this. So you have to start there. You can't configure what you don't know you have, okay? So ultimately, what my goal here is, why don't we fix the house? I guess anyone in here, have you gone through some of these hardening exercises? Has anyone ever changed a setting and caused disruption? There's a couple, yeah. It happens, right? Because there's documentation on it, but each setting on each machine with different applications running, they're going to interact different ways, right? I mean, I will note one of the every 12th onboarding, I probably find on at least one machine, somebody's domain trust is broken, right? They didn't even know the policy's never had a chance, right? So how are we going to secure that house when we're strapped for time and we're busy and when these settings cause disruption, right? I'm going to do my best to kind of share my stories on how this can be easier, but end of the day, this is something that's difficult. So let's keep going though. And I think I do another little break. Oh yeah, hardened but still no VPN, right? At least now the endpoint's hardened. All right. This is strategic hardening with CIS. I mentioned this is a prioritized list of controls, and I've really emphasized the first two here already, right? Asset management, know your asset inventory, hardware and software. Without knowing this, where are you going to start, right? You don't know that. Control 3, data protection, know where your data is, right? Control 4, this is where hardening really comes into play. The fourth most prioritized thing, right? And you saw all of these layers in that little house demonstration, right? Control 1 was the hardware asset. Control 2, maybe the software the guy was using. Data protection, you have to know where it is, right? This was a demonstration of literally that. And I will note from the CIS website itself, these again are a prioritized list and are designed to be those easy to understand, right? Get you where you need to be. So if this is a prioritized list, I want to really focus on that. We all must already do controls 1 through 4. All of us in here have an incredible asset inventory that stays up to date. When an employee leaves, they're offboarded 100%. Every time there's not a random SID sitting on the box, maybe no username, but the SID's gone too, right? These are, and again, I'm joking up here, but these are things that I see very often, right? These are real stories, right? Having your offboarding process documented, your procedures done, right? These are things that all feed into hardening. If you're not using it, if they don't exist, they shouldn't have the privileges that they don't need. They're not there anymore, right? Anyway, let's look at some of these other controls in the 18 list. Since all of us agree here, we would never go out of order on this list. We wouldn't, go to control 7 and do vulnerability management before we actually configure anything. I've heard from a lot of people, and maybe I'll put Josh on the spot here, right? I mean, if you have your assets all configured correctly, does your risk of having a CVE exploited maybe go down or is mitigated by having the assets configured? Josh, would you back that statement, or would you have a different take on that? Right. And the other big term I want to shout out in that comment is blast radius too. If you have all of your assets configured correctly and hardened right, if one machine is compromised, it's going to make all of the follow-up attacks a little bit harder. That lateral movement, right? When you have all of the networking protocols up to date and the right encryptions that are being allowed, it makes all of the blast radius, that circumference of just attack, where they can go after that, a little bit more difficult, right? So continuous vulnerability management, again, not bashing any of these. Obviously, they're critical, but we are missing things. Control 10, malware defenses, right? We got to chuckle at the EDR comment because everyone probably has one, but we probably don't configure assets as good as we could. And the last one I think I write here is, monitoring and defense, right? Count as high as you can, 1, 2, skip it, right? That's what I've seen in all of my market research. They'll jump around to the things that not, prioritize the most ROI, prioritize the most return on ROSI, is that a term? I don't know, return on security investment. Not the things that make it the most secure out of the gate, but they prioritize the things that are the easiest to do, right? If you deploy an EDR, it's easy to get it out there. You still have to configure the EDR, guys, right? I've seen that too. But you do what you can, and it is because of a lack of time, and hardening is difficult with the existing mediums that are on the market today, or rather native to Windows. So let's keep going here. This is intended to be a very overwhelming slide. I know you can't read it. That is perfectly fine. This is something that Chris Johnson, Josh Copeland, myself were all a part of. It was a CIS working group hosted by Matt Lee of PAX 8, if you guys know him. And our goal here was to take all of those 18 controls, and I didn't mention this part right, there's 18 controls. There's also 153 sub-controls, right? These are called safeguards. So not only are they giving you like 18 high-level things you need to accomplish, they then give you sub-steps or sub-goals of what you need to perform to then achieve that control. Well, we wanted to run an experiment to say, okay, which safeguards need to be completed or need to be done in order to effectively meet a control, right? So this is control 4, hardening, right? And out of all the controls we mapped, this one had the most safeguards and most sub-controls fed into the control, right? Anyone have any guesses? All the green bubbles there, 20, 40. So that is actually 43, right? So 43 different safeguards all feed into just control 4. So the return on security investment, like this is where the money is. This is where when your assets are configured, when you run that, a lot of us here probably have a configuration scanner, right? We know the issues that are wrong with our endpoints, with our assets, but knowing it is only half the battle. Taking the time to make those red marks green, that's where the return is. Knowing about it, honestly, makes you accountable to it. Now you have to follow that, right? Now, if an incident were to occur and you had to present in court or anything, how are you going to defend yourself? Oh, you knew about all of this, but you didn't take action? How do you prove you were taking action or were in the process, right? Is PowerShell giving you that ability to prove that you're trying? Right? There's a gap here, and that's ultimately what I found out in all my market research. Again, you're getting like 3 years of just effort, all in hopefully a 45-minute presentation, if I balance my time correctly without a clock. I've been looking around, have not seen one, so hopefully I do okay here. Anyway, this is the QR code. If you want to see all 153 mappings, this is what's going to take you there. It is a public accessible link. If you can't scan it, let me know, so happy to give you a paper on it. Anyway, do another quick break, right? We talked about skipping control 4, right? Even though control 4 may seem minor, seems like the smallest block in this big world of data loss, right? That small block, that one setting that is misconfigured, might be the way in. That might be how the bad actor gets into one machine. And if there's more settings misconfigured, or default, right? Default's bad. That's that whole brick is going to come tumbling. I hinted at this next one here. I know all the settings in Windows. I don't need the CIS benchmarks, right? Okay, if you did have to defend your choices as to how you configured your assets, do you want to go, oh, Chris told me that he knew all the Windows settings and we did the ones he said. Who's going to buy that? So the other thing I'd love for you to walk away with is defensibility, right? Being able to blame someone else. Wow, you had an incident? What were you doing? Well, we followed the CIS guidelines. Oh, that's better than saying that you just did what Chris said, right? That gives you an authoritative body who says, oh, yeah, you guys were doing the things. How were they configured correctly? Why was whatever still going on, right? Now you get to point at something or someone, right, and say, hey, I just did what they said. Talk to them, not me. I was just a medium doing what I had to do to secure it according to their guidance, right? And I'm going to talk about CIS a lot, like you've already seen that, but there are so many other frameworks. Obviously, we got NIST and regulatory frameworks too. CIS is just the most comprehensive as to, for this, do that. For this, do that, right? So that's why I talk about CIS so much. Anyway, defensibility. That's the other word here. All right. I do want to make sure everyone has something to walk away from this presentation, right? If I overwhelm the crap out of you bashing PowerShell, you're like, why is this guy up here talking bad about PowerShell? That's my best friend for the last 2 decades. Like, I hear you. It is incredible. I've seen some incredible scripters. Anyway, you still need to make a plan here today, right? You do need to pick a framework. I mean, I guess just in the audience, like how many of us follow a framework? It doesn't have to be CIS, but how many of us follow a framework? One hand? Okay, there's 3, there we go. Only about a quarter of the room follow a framework, right? So that would be the first step I would recommend all of us to walk away from this with, right? Is pick a framework. Figure out what works for your needs. You're in a regulatory space. Figure out what framework crosswalks, and that is one thing I didn't mention about CIS. Like, they will take their recommendations, crosswalk it to NIST, crosswalk it to PCI, HIPAA, whatever that is. They will crosswalk their recommendations so that for the auditor, when the auditor says, hey, for this category or for this section, what are you doing for it? CIS provides those documented crosswalks so that you can make those audit processes easier. Okay? Identify the assets and scope. I'm not saying to attack the world. Some of you here may be at very large enterprises. You probably can't do all 100,000 assets all at once, right? So pick the scope. Maybe you just want to start with servers, right? You only have a few hundred servers and you have a few thousand workstations. Start with the servers. Start somewhere. Just figure out that scope, right? And then document it. Word of the day, maybe. Like, document your processes, procedures. Make that plan. It's not a plan until it's written down. Document it. So then you'll have a plan. So, you know, I don't want to just say make a plan and go off and prosper. So I did do my best to kind of identify what goes into a plan. So this is going to be that initial assessment. Like I said, there are a ton of scanning. When I say scanning tools, this is things like, you know, Tenable, Qualys, right? There's a lot of things that can perform scans. Senteon, right? There's a lot of things that can perform scans to tell you where you're at. And this is important, right? If you don't have the time to, you know, go download that PDF and then just figure it out yourself, this is going to really automate that just to perform the scan. But after, again, you know about it. Oh, what's up? Great call out. So CIS does. It's called the CIS tool. You do need a membership with CIS to get that, but everything else I've talked about here today with the recommendations, 100% free. So this is just the community they give. It's a nonprofit. And then Syscat is their paid offering to where you can, I believe, install an agent and it will run that scan for you, right? And I don't know how the price relates to like the Tenable or Qualys, but I do know it is a one annual cost as opposed to a monthly bottle. So find what's going to give you that best type of data, and that is one of them. So the next step, the back button doesn't work. All right, well, the next step is configure mediation. Like I said, make the changes, right? That is going to be needed there. The next one I believe was monitoring. We talked about this as well, right? How do you know after that script is deployed or after that Intune policy is deployed that they actually took, right? And then verification. Again, monitoring, verification kind of feed into each other. But the last step, again, is reporting. So now that we kind of know the plan, I'll switch the slide because I haven't already done that. And we'll just kind of break down each of these steps with the mediums that do exist natively, or if you do have that E3, E5 license, Intune and whatnot. So if we wanted to perform an assessment in any of these mediums, Intune, who here loves Intune's reporting? It's the best thing ever. Love the Graph API. You work with those. It's easy. It's not complicated. Yeah. So you probably do need a third party to do this type of reporting in there. Group policy. Who's run the command GP resolve? Is that a familiar one in this room? Yeah. Yeah. There's a smiley face in the back. So GP resolve, super easy to read, especially at scale. Absolutely not. Especially when we're talking about 500 settings, right? So it's very manual and it's not centralized. That's another key thing, is making sure you can see all of your endpoints, all of your assets across the scope in a centralized database. And group policy, absolutely not. PowerShell, again, honestly, guys, you can do anything in PowerShell. If you have the time, if you are a wizard, right, you can probably figure out how to generate a pretty good report via PowerShell. I haven't met anyone who wants to do it, but it could exist. So step 2 of that plan, remediation. I don't know if I said this, but anyone ever, I said this a few times, but can anyone agree or disagree, like deploy an Intune policy and realize it never took? Does that happen? Is that fair to say? Yeah. So that's another thing. So how do you know that it's actually doing the thing? Group policy. The funny thing about group policy, and I found this out just the other month, Microsoft doesn't have a group policy division anymore. Fun fact. So anyway, the shortcomings of group policy will not be changing. So conflicting policies. This is one that is important to talk about. So I talked about group policy, the other term, local policy, right? So local is really that source of truth. That is, on the device itself, those are the reg keys and the state of the setting, which group policy is a medium to change local policy. Intune is supposed to be a medium to change those local policies, right? And effectively, when you have a local policy that differs from a group policy or differs from an Intune policy, they're going to fight each other, right? That's how it works. So the chain of order here is those domain choices, the GPO, the Intune, those will win, okay? So if you deploy a PowerShell script to change that local config, and you realize it didn't take, or maybe, I don't know how you realize it, right? That's the whole point of this. You can't realize it. But if that does change a week later, it's probably because something overrode it at a higher level. Because that is how Microsoft makes their prioritization of how these interact. So now you have to not only reconfigure the local, or you choose which one you're going to reconfigure, rather, right? You can reconfigure that domain level, reconfigure the local, which one's right? It becomes a bit overwhelming, and let alone version control. I know that's probably not something we talk about too much, but these recommendations might change every now and then. So making sure they're up to date and stay up to date is part of that challenge. PowerShell, again, highly customizable. You have a wizard in-house, probably pull off some of this. Next step, verification. Yeah, we already talked about Intune. I won't do that again, but difficult to verify. Oh, undo button. Anyone wish Intune had an undo button? Wouldn't that be cool? Oh, something did break. I'll just click this. Like, it remembers my last action. Crazy. Group policy, manual checking, right? Again, I'm not going to go too deep again. PowerShell, manual script checks. You can write a follow-up script to verify it did change, right? Just redeploy that every single day at boot up, because the settings don't change after the logon script. All right, monitoring, same thing here. Monitoring, verification, very similar, right? Intune is really not designed to talk about the monitoring aspect, right? Intune is very good at pushing changes. Notice I didn't say checking to see if the push is closed, right? I didn't say pull, I said push. Intune can only push endpoint policies. It has no idea what happens after it pushes. And I don't think they tell you when they're going to push either, which is super special. I think you can set that on a timer. So they'll push. That's not really monitoring, in my opinion. Group policy, again, you're going to need additional tools. PowerShell, you can have recurring running scripts, but it's all periodic. There's no real time with any of the built-in mediums. Last one, reporting. We already joked about Intune. I know this slide gets a little repetitive, but it is important to kind of call this out, right? This is the things that, these are the mediums we have when we enter that new job. We enter that new medium. This is the very common things that we have at our disposal, right? It's about understanding the shortcomings of these and adjusting your plan to address it. Or, if able, right, So this was a big takeaway. This was a big graph I made throughout my market research. Because these are real stories that I'm sharing. These are what people have told me. I'm not just standing up here saying, yeah, this is why I built my company. Like, this is it. No, these are what people told me. This is why I wanted to do it, because this is what people told me were the issues. So we designed Senteon to really address these issues. All right. Interactive person. All of it's been interactive. You guys can ask questions, whatever. But if our goal as an enterprise is to prevent unauthorized access, I know all of us have downloaded that 1,300-page PDF and we know all these settings. Does anyone have any guesses or just facts on which settings, if enabled or if put into the right state, might prevent unauthorized access? I know this is a really wide, open-ended question, so that's fine. I did try my best to kind of address some of these myself. So, user rights assignments. Everyone know here there's about 73 different user right assignment settings? Yeah. Got to talk to the guy in the back right corner. He's obviously downloaded what I'm talking about today. There's 73 of these, right? This is different than conditional access and everything else. These are the local user rights assignments, right? This is making sure admins can only do admin things. Making sure, if it's an admin account and they input their wrong password a handful of times, they actually get locked out because by default, admin accounts can just be brute force. There's no actual account lockout. Crazy. So user rights assignments one, user account control, UAC behavior. This is a hard one for a lot of my partners and people I work with, right? By default, when you need to elevate your privileges from a user to an admin, you input your credentials. Prompt for credentials is the title of the recommendation, or rather, title of the default setting. CIS takes this really far to where they will just say automatically deny all elevation, right? That can be very disruptive if part of your processes, part of your procedures is to remote in as a user and then elevate your privileges from there. That's not going to allow you to do that. So you're now going to have to change your internal processes, your internal procedures to account for this. And that's not a bad thing, guys. Documentation is meant to be updated, right? We want to update it. I know. Anyway, user rights assignment is the big one here. So the next goal, reduce the attack surface. We all have our ASR rules in place. I guess that's repetitive. ASR in place. Anyway, so what settings can we do here? SMB1. I still find this in the world today. Every few onboardings, it comes up. W-Digest. Structured exception. C-Hop. Man. I mean, these are the things that you can do. And like I said, when you don't have time to do all 500 at once, choose the ones that make the greatest return on your security investment, the return on your time. And that's some of these here. One thing we didn't talk about, system performance. Can changing settings actually improve, the battery life on that device? Can it improve the amount of resources you needed to do things? This is stuff that I am working on a case study to prove, but I will tell you, the answer is yes. So making sure you don't have useless features or irrelevant features for a business accessible, right? The more applications, the more software, the more features that Windows gives you that you have running is going to drain that battery, right? It's going to make it run slower, right? It's going to use more CPU, right? So making sure you disable this stuff and making sure and again, these are written verbatim as they come from GPO. So like the third one, allow, right? The recommendation is to disable, right? So making sure you follow the recommendations, and GPO, I mean, if anyone's read a GPO, you will probably relate to this. Double negatives, right? The title of the GPO, disable control alt delete. The recommendation is disable. A little confusing, right? Because that is going to enable control alt delete. Anywho, I know it's configured, guys. It's 9 a.m. Super invigorating things, right? Exciting. All right. Governance to ensure compliance. This really goes back to that defensibility thing, right? Making sure you can do the things you're saying. Minimum having your password policies in place, being able to prove it. Again, store. You want to store with reversible encryption. No, the recommendation is not to do that, but the GPO does. Block Microsoft accounts. This is one a lot of people do get confused with. The recommendation here that I'm talking about has to do with like the personal Microsoft accounts, right? We would never let our employees or coworkers sign in with a personal Microsoft account. I wouldn't find that every 20% of onboardings. Yeah, they're out there, just blank SID strings. All right, like I said, this was all my market research, so I'm very open to questions. Feel free to just raise your application and you install that new video editing software in this example, they will add privileges to the user rights assignments that you don't know about, right? Did you read that whole ULOG there? Probably not, right? So they are adding their rights to do things. And if they wanted to, this is literally going to DOS your system. If they want to lock pages of memory, take all the resources, you can't do anything else, right? And they just do that because they want their because when they designed this, they were the most important thing in the world. They want their application to work better than anyone else's, right? So they did that. And that's something that we found, right? So that's one. Another thing to know is these settings do change. Windows updates, right? Those change registries. You didn't want to do that without telling me. It's crazy. Other things I've seen. Oh, this is my favorite. Built-in solutions claiming they made a change, right? We already kind of talked about this. The display value that Intune says it is, we check locally. You look at that local regp, you'll be able to say, oh, Intune's wrong. So next question, is Intune a security tool? So that's the issue here. There are platforms out there, and there's EDRs that I've talked with personally, right? They do have settings that maybe want to configure Defender, maybe want to configure some of the Windows firewalls, right? They use, and I'm saying they in their general sense of the term, right? They use Microsoft Mediums to make changes. They use GPO to make that change. They use Intune to make that change. So now, if your EDR is now saying they configure Defender, we're going to disable that for you so that we can have all control. It may not actually take the policy. I have seen this many times. I don't only show that Intune is wrong, I show that EDRX is wrong. Imagine if you had to attest to the configuration states in your environment, and you're like, oh yeah, here's my EDR report, it says it's configured. They check that local box, and like, it was never applied. Who's getting blamed? Should you? I don't think you should. Will you? Maybe. I don't know. But that's the limitations. And these EDR companies are not wrong for wanting to do this. I think it's great. I want more people to change settings. I think we have enough tools out there that create noise. Anyone else want more noise makers? More red? You want to know about all the other stuff you already didn't know about? That's what's really coming to market, is really what I'm seeing in that trend for that example. Chris Johnson here sent me a good article on it. But there's plenty of noise creators out there. We need to start honestly pushing our vendors, right? I'm standing up here as a vendor, but we need to all push our vendors to make the changes, to be better, right? So this is really the root of it here. Don't just trust what it says in that software. Yeah, Windows updates are annoying. Windows updates absolutely change settings. We have, because a piece of what we do is change tracking, right? We say when the setting changes, we change it back, right? That's what we do. So since like going marketing, Xbox policy settings, these will just magically turn back on. Anyone play Xbox on their work machine? No? That's crazy, right? Maybe you work at EA, maybe you do. But anyway, they'll just randomly turn on. It's absolutely a beautiful thing. And they don't change them back. That's the other thing. The last one I think I wrote, oh yeah, SMB1. I've already joked about this enough. Anyone here have SMB1 set to enabled here? Anyone? No one wants to admit it at least? Hopefully you guys don't. But yeah, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. I found it funny. I'm in Iowa, farmers insurance. Anyway, I got a kick out of it. So what can you walk away here with? We're all different levels in here, right? So beginner, intermediate, expert, right? What can we do from here? Right, if you are a beginner, just try to understand some of these settings. Download that free PDF. Just look at it, get overwhelmed, and then look at it again the next day and try to read some of it. Start small, right? Look at those free resources. One of these slides, I'll have a QR code to Senteon, but it is a free sign up. There is a freemium that has all this in a database with a ton of explanations as to what they are. So feel free to take advantage of it, completely free. Intermediate, right? I mean, expand the scope. Like I said, in my research, I really found most people try to do about 15 settings. 15 of 500 is still more than zero. But they did try to do about 15 settings. So when a default Windows box is about 70 settings, the average that I see in the market really sits around like 82, 83, because some people do it, right? Some people do some of these settings. So expand your scope. Try to start automating some of it. Try to figure out what you can eliminate out of that manual work. And advanced, right? Start to integrate tools, right? If you don't have the means to do those first two steps, look at tools sooner, right? There are vendors out there who want people to configure their assets. crazy. So yeah, just start to take these action steps and really think about how can you improve these processes today. Any shot this is going to have sound? Do we know? We'll find out together. I don't know how to play it. Heartbreaking. Oh. No. Heartbreaking, guys. Anyone know this commercial? Do you want to go to Bora Bora? Boring, boring. So this is a very funny skip. I honestly, this is probably user error. I'll be completely transparent. I totally did not connect my internet here. I did put it locally. Clearly that didn't work. Anyway, this is Flo from Progressive, right? They're trying to tell her, hey, all the money you can save, all the great things when you switch to Progressive, right? You'll have money to go to Bora Bora, right? Learn to explain the benefit. All right, that's probably 45 minutes. So this is the last slide. Learn to explain the benefit. Oh man, IT. All right, maybe this will do it. All right, so learn to explain the benefit. I'll just wrap up here really quick, right? If you just go to work tomorrow and say, hey, or Monday, and say, hey, we need to start configuring our assets, that's probably not going to be as effective as it could be, right? You do need to understand why we want to do this, why this is important, right? So talk about it, learn about it, make a case for it. And like I said, those resources at the end. Oh my goodness. Resources at the end, guys. I am very active on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. Happy to talk with you guys after the show, introduce Senteon a little bit more too. I created a little university or resource hub, rewrote about 1,500 security policies. It's disgusting. But those are available free to you. And that's the middle QR code. CIS benchmarks directly is the last one. The first one is that freemium, totally not mobile friendly, so why would I put in a QR code? That's just what I did. Anywho, shoot me an email, talk after the show. Thank you for being here.